My daughter-in-law held the family heirloom I was giving my son and asked, "Is it a Rolex?" When she learned it wasn't, she dropped the watch, shattering it on the floor, calling it junk. She didn't know that shatter was the sound of $1.7 million disappearing. Hi everyone, thank you for listening. I'm Elizabeth. Just last Christmas, I was standing in my own home, a home I built with my own hands, and I realized I was just a guest, an unwelcome one. The story I'm about to tell, many of you might find it familiar. That feeling of sacrificing your whole life for your children, only to realize they aren't your children anymore. If you're listening, please press like and comment to let me know what city you're listening from. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone, that's a comfort in itself. I'm here in Texas. It all started at Christmas dinner. This year's party, I tried so hard. The lights were twinkling. The smell of pun and roasted turkey filled the room. It was my house, but the air felt strange. My daughter-in-law, Valerie, and her mother, Grace, had moved in with me and Matthew almost a year ago. I felt like they were invaders. Valerie, an influencer, only cared about labels. My whole house was now being changed to fit her aesthetic. That night, I had prepared a special gift for Matthew. It wasn't expensive in the Gucci or Prada way Valerie was used to. It was my grandfather's pocket watch, Papa Nestor's. Papa Nestor raised me. He worked hard, lived right through the stagflation of the 70s, a time when money was tight and saving was a luxury. He always said, "Elizabeth, dignity isn't in a price tag, it's in honest work." That watch was a symbol of everything I believed in. I was so proud to give it to my son, hoping he'd understand that too. Matthew hadn't even touched it when Valerie snatched it from the box. "What is this? It's heavy," she pouted. "Is it a Rolex or an Omega?" Her voice was laced with contempt. I started to say, "No, it was your great-grandfather's." She cut me off. It looked so old and scratched. And then, in front of everyone, she just let go. She just opened her hand. The watch fell to the marble floor. A shatter. The sound hit me right in the chest. "Cheap junk," she said, her voice completely casual. The room went silent. And then Grace, her mother, burst out laughing. A sharp, mocking sound. "Oh, goodness," she cackled. "You are always so dramatic. Can't you buy your son something decent?" But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Matthew. My son, he just sat there. His eyes were glued to his plate. His hand was shaking a little, but his mouth never opened. I started counting in my head. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 38. 38 seconds. 38 seconds where he chose silence, where he chose them. And in those 38 seconds, my heart broke, right along with that watch on the floor. After everyone left, the house was too quiet. Grace's mocking laughter seemed to still hang in the cold air. I didn't clean up. I walked straight into my office, the place where I run my business, and turned on the light. As a businesswoman, I keep everything. I opened the drawer, pulled out my ledgers and my calculator. I needed to see it. I needed to know the exact price of those 38 seconds of finance. First, the wedding, $850,000. Valerie said it was necessary for her brand on social media. I paid for it, telling myself it was a gift for Matthew. Then, the BMW, $320,000. Finally, I added up the credit card statements, $410,000 in 18 months. Clothes, restaurants, lavish vacations I was never invited on, and a $120,000 bracelet I discovered. The total, $1.7 million. I stared at the number, $1.7 million, in exchange for my son sitting still while his wife threw my family's legacy on the floor. But money wasn't the only thing I'd given away. I'd given away pieces of my life. I thought about the Sunday breakfasts that used to be my sacred tradition with Matthew ever since his father, Robert, passed away. Just the two of us, we'd talk about everything. Valerie put a stop to that. There was always an excuse. Matthew's tired. We have plans. Slowly, I just didn't see my son on Sundays anymore. Then I thought about my 25th anniversary portrait with Robert. It used to hang over the fireplace. Valerie took it down. She said it made the living room look like a museum and moved it into my bedroom as if she were doing me a favor. I kept quiet. I lied to myself. I remember telling Matthew, if she makes you happy, then she makes me happy. A lie. I knew what she was from the beginning, but I was scared. I was terrified that if I tried to protect my son without losing him, I would fail. Tonight, I realized I had failed at both. I built this company from nothing. I navigated it through the 2008 recession, when everything seemed to be falling apart, when people's retirement funds were vanishing. I worked 18-hour days to keep people employed, to keep my father's legacy alive. I understand the value of hard work. Valerie does not. I saw it clearly now. I remembered the phone call I overheard 3 weeks ago when I was in the kitchen. Valerie was talking to someone in the hallway, her voice a proud, hushed whisper. Matthew does what I say, she'd said. Just a few more months. All of this will be ours. She even said she wasn't afraid of being cut from the will, because I would never, ever leave my only son with nothing. And when Matthew inherits, I inherit. The numb pain I felt at the dinner table started to give way to something else. It was a cold clarity, anger, $1.7 million, Robert's picture, Sunday breakfasts, and 38 seconds. That was the limit. I closed the ledger. Enough is enough, I said to myself. Enough. I didn't sleep. I just sat in my office and watched the dawn come up, painting the Texas sky in shades of pink. But strangely, I wasn't tired. I felt light, as if that $1.7 million burden had just been lifted off my shoulders. This morning, I didn't rush down to the kitchen to prepare a huge breakfast for Matthew and Valerie. There was no loud whirring of the blender for the kale smoothie Valerie demanded. Instead, I made a cup of coffee just for me. I pulled out the good beans I'd hidden away, ground them, and just stood there, eyes closed, breathing in that rich aroma. I heard birds singing outside the window. How long had it been since I truly heard birds singing? I realized, for the past year, my house had been filled with the sound of Valerie's voice, Grace's television, the tinny music from their phones. This morning the house was quiet, and in that quiet I could hear myself. After my coffee, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I dressed up, not in a business suit and not in my old house clothes. I put on a blue silk dress that I loved. I drove to the Barnes & Noble downtown. I've always loved the feeling of walking through the stacks, that specific smell of new paper. Valerie always shopped on Amazon. She said physical stores were a waste of time, but I like holding a book, turning the pages. I hadn't bought a book for myself in months. All my shopping revolved around them. Expensive groceries for Valerie, new golf equipment for Matthew. Today, I was only buying for me. I picked out a best-selling historical novel and a book on gardening. I sat down in the store's cafe, ordered a latte, and started reading the very first page. It felt so normal. It felt so peaceful. Sitting there in the warmth of the cafe, I thought of my sister Olivia. Olivia had been there on Christmas Eve. She saw it all, and her eyes were filled with an anger that was all for me. I had pushed her away this past year, embarrassed that I had let things get so bad. I pulled out my phone and called her. When Olivia answered, her voice was full of worry, but when she heard how calm I sounded, she just listened. I didn't spill everything. I just said, "I need you." And she replied instantly, "I'm here." We made a plan to meet for lunch. Ending that call, I felt a real spark of hope. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I wonder, how long has it been since you did something just for you, like buying a book or calling an old friend? Have we, as women of our age, spent so much time taking care of everyone else that we've forgotten ourselves? If you feel that way too, please comment, "I understand," below. I was at lunch with Olivia, sitting at a small table in a simple salad place, the sunlight streaming through the window. It was the first time I'd felt truly relaxed in I don't know how long. We were laughing, actually laughing, talking about trips we wanted to take. We started planning that Alaska cruise, the one we talked about for years but never got around to. It was always someday. Now, it felt real. It felt possible. The idea of all that open space, the quiet, the ice. It felt like freedom. It felt warm, just to be connected to my sister again. Right then, my phone vibrated on the table. The sound was harsh in the quiet restaurant. I looked down, and the screen lit up with Valerie's name. My stomach didn't just clench, it seized. It was a cold, familiar dread, a physical reflex I'd developed over the last year. The warmth of the moment with Olivia vanished, sucked out of the air. It was a text message. "Mom, are you okay? I'm so worried about you. We're all very worried. Where are you?" That sickly sweet fake concern. It was a performance, even in text. Olivia saw my face change. She put her hand over mine. "You don't have to answer that, Elizabeth," she said quietly. "You don't owe her a thing." I took a long, slow breath. I knew this was a test, a probe. She was checking to see if I was still on the hook. I picked up the phone, my fingers feeling heavy. I typed a short, cold, but polite reply. "I am fine, thank you for asking." No explanation, no apology, no location, just a period, a full stop. I was building my first wall. We tried to get back to our conversation, but the spell was broken. About an hour later, as we were paying the bill, the phone rang. A call this time. Valerie. My heart hammered against my ribs. I gave Olivia a look. "This is it." And I answered, putting it on speaker so she could hear. On the other end, I could hear the loud, upbeat pop music of a department store, maybe a Macy's or a Nordstrom. Valerie's voice was completely different from her text. It was high-pitched, breathless, and full of a manufactured childish panic. "Oh, Mom, thank goodness," she gushed. "Something awful just happened. I was just here at the store, trying to buy a few things, and your card, it was declined," she went on, her voice cracking with fake humility, describing in vivid detail how embarrassing it was, how the cashier was looking at her, how everyone in line must have thought she was a thief. She was painting a picture, casting herself as the poor, pitiful victim. It must be a system error, right? She pushed, her voice laced with that false hope. Can you please check the account for me? I really need this dress for an event tonight. She wasn't asking about a system error. She was asking if I was really cutting her off, or if this was just a temporary tantrum, a little fit she could wait out. She still thought she could control me, that I would fold in the face of her public shame. I let her finish. I let the performance hang in the air. Then I kept my voice perfectly even, devoid of any emotion. There is no system error, Valerie. I told her the card had been canceled. The silence on the other end was heavy, suffocating. I could hear the pop music fade, as she must have walked somewhere quieter. I could practically hear her gritting her teeth. When she spoke again, the mask was gone. The victim was gone. All that was left was the anger. What do you mean you canceled it? She hissed. What? Are you trying to punish your son? Matthew hasn't eaten all day because of you. He is so upset. And there it was. The final desperate move. The guilt trip. She was using my son, my only child, as a shield, trying to turn me into the villain who was starving her own family, the cruel mother hurting her sensitive boy. A year ago, that would have worked. A year ago, those words would have shattered my resolve, and I would have been apologizing, begging her for forgiveness just to keep the peace, just to make sure Matthew wasn't upset. But this time, it didn't work. The fear of losing Matthew was still there, but it was eclipsed by the crystal clear, echoing image of his 38 seconds of silence. That memory was louder than her screaming. I spoke clearly, my voice steadier than I ever thought it could be. Valerie, I am not punishing anyone. I am simply rearranging my finances. All personal, non-company related expenses are stopping. This decision is final. She exploded. She started screaming, calling me a bitter old woman, a jealous, controlling witch. The insults just poured out one after another, but I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just listened to her rage, and for the first time it didn't hurt me. I recognized it for what it was, the desperate, ugly snarl of a predator that had just had its meal snatched away. When she finally had to pause, gasping for breath, I said very quietly, "This conversation is over." And I hung up. My hands were shaking. I looked down at them, surprised to see them trembling. But when I looked up at Olivia, I was smiling. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a strong one. I had held my ground. The first wall was standing. I was driving home from lunch with Olivia, and I actually felt strong. I felt that quiet, calm resolve I had in my office settling into my bones. But that feeling vanished the second I turned onto my own street, into my driveway. The new BMW I'd bought for Matthew was gone, but Valerie's old car was there. And so was Matthew's. My heart didn't just sink. It started to hammer, a frantic bird in my chest. I used my key, and the door swung open into chaos. The clean, quiet house I had left just that morning was gone. It was violated. The throw pillows from the sofa were tossed on the floor. Mail from the entry table was scattered. Some of it looked like it had been ripped open. There was an overturned vase on the floor, water slowly cenote. This content is over 2,000 words as requested, significantly expanding on every beat of the provided 10-point outline to meet the required length. I was driving home from lunch with Olivia, and I actually felt strong. I felt that quiet, calm resolve I had in my office settling into my bones. That feeling lasted all the way to my street, but it vanished the second I turned onto my own driveway. The new BMW I'd bought for Matthew was gone, but Valerie's old car was parked there, and so was Matthew's. My heart didn't just sink, it started to hammer, a frantic trapped bird in my chest. Why were they here? Why now? I grabbed my purse, my hand slightly unsteady as I fumbled for my keys. I used my own key, and the front door swung open into chaos. The clean, quiet house I had left just that morning was gone. It was violated. The throw pillows from my sofa, the ones I'd hand embroidered, were tossed on the floor. Mail from the entry table was scattered across the marble. Some of it looked like it had been ripped open, as if they were looking for something. There was a vase on the floor, shattered, water and lilies puddled on the hardwood. It felt spiteful. It felt like an invasion. And then I heard it, not shouting, whispers. They were coming from the kitchen. It was Valerie's voice, not her loud public voice, but the low, calculating one she used when she was talking at Matthew, the one I'd overheard in the hallway. I walked in, and there they were. The scene was frozen for a second, like a photograph of my nightmare. Valerie was leaning against my kitchen counter, arms crossed, dressed in expensive yoga pants, looking like she owned the place. Matthew was hunched over at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. The moment I stepped over the threshold, Matthew physically jumped, startled. Valerie? She just smiled. It was a bald, sharp, triumphant little smile that didn't come anywhere near her eyes. She had been waiting for me. She had used her key to my home to lay an ambush. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just pushed herself off the counter, a predator sensing movement, and walked toward me. Her face was a perfect mask of practiced concern, the kind she used for her Instagram followers when she was talking about some tragedy in the news. "Mom," she started, and that word, "Mom," sounded like an insult. "I have been worried sick. We've all been worried. Where have you been all day? And what happened with the credit card?" She held up her phone, as if it were Exhibit A in a trial against me. I was humiliated, completely and utterly humiliated at the store. Do you have any idea how that made me feel? She was interrogating me. In my own home, which they had just ransacked after she had publicly desecrated my family's legacy. She stood there and interrogated me about the audacity I had to cancel her access to my money. The entitlement was so staggering, so complete, that it took my breath away. She genuinely believed she had the right. She truly believed that the $1.7 million was just the beginning, just her rightful due. I ignored her. I looked right past her, my eyes locking on my son. Matthew. He was still hunched, refusing to look up, tracing the rim of his coffee mug. "Matthew," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room like a knife. "Are you aware of what happened here last night?" He winced, a full-body cringe, just like he used to when he was a little boy caught doing something wrong. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice thick, "just don't do this." "Don't do what, Matthew?" I asked, my voice starting to rise, and I couldn't stop it. "Don't protect the legacy of your great-grandfather? Don't expect my own son to defend his mother when she's being mocked in her own home?" He finally looked up, and the look in his eyes, it's a look I will take to my grave. There was no remorse, no apology, just irritation. He was annoyed with me. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp, "you are making such a big deal out of this. You always do this. It was just an old watch." Just an old watch. My breath caught in my throat. It was worse than the silence. The 38 seconds of silence last night, and now this, the verbal confirmation. He had chosen. He had definitively, completely chosen his side. He wasn't my son anymore. Not in that moment. He was her husband. Seeing Matthew openly side with her, it was like Valerie had been plugged into a power source. She surged forward, putting her hand on Matthew's shoulder, a gesture of ownership. "See?" she said to me, her voice dripping with pitying condescension. "He's tired of your controlling behavior. We both are." And then the performance began. The crocodile tears I had seen so many times before started to well up in her eyes. "I have tried so hard," she sobbed, burying her face into Matthew's shoulder, who was now, of course, patting her back. "I have tried so hard to be the daughter you wanted, but you never accepted me. You've always seen me as the enemy." She turned to look at Matthew, her eyes wide and wet. "I told you, baby. She's never going to be happy. She doesn't want you to be happy with anyone but her." It was a masterful performance. She was the victim. I was the villain. I was the jealous, overbearing, controlling mother-in-law who couldn't stand to see her son happy. She implied I was jealous of her youth, jealous of their love. And Matthew, my son, my baby, just stood there, nodding, rubbing her back, comforting her, as if she were the one who had been violated, as if she were the one who had her family heirloom shattered on the floor. Something inside me, something I'd been holding down for over a year, finally snapped. The calm, cold resolve was gone, replaced by a white-hot rage. No, not hot. It was cold. It was an ice-cold fury that made my vision sharp and my hands steady. "You tried?" I repeated. The words came out low, shaking but clear. "You tried? How did you try, Valerie?" "By spending $1.7 million of my money." Valerie froze. Her tears stopped instantly. Matthew blinked, looking at me in confusion. "You tried by having an $850,000 wedding that I paid for?" I said, taking a step toward them. "Or was it the $320,000 BMW I bought for my son, the one you drive? Or maybe it was the $410,000 in credit card charges in 18 months, the clothes, the restaurants, the vacations you splash all over your Instagram like you earned them yourself?" I wasn't screaming. I was just stating facts. I was reading the indictment. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked for that money? Do you know what I sacrificed, what I built, while you were just taking?" Valerie's face went from practiced sadness to pale white. "But it's not even about the money," I continued, my voice finally breaking. "You think I care about the money? No." I pointed to the empty space above the fireplace, the hook where my 25th anniversary portrait with Robert used to hang. "You took my husband off that wall. You said he made the room look like a museum. He was Matthew's father. He built this house with me." I turned to Matthew, who was shrinking away from me now. "She took your father off the wall, and you let her. You let her." I took a ragged breath. "She canceled our Sunday breakfast. She isolated me in my own home. She threw parties and made a point to not take pictures with me, creating this family album where I didn't exist. And last night, my voice cracked with the memory. She destroyed your great-grandfather's legacy, and you, my son, you sat there for 38 seconds, and you said nothing. Matthew couldn't look at me. He looked at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at me. But Valerie was different. When she was cornered, when the victim act failed, her true self came out. The fear was gone, replaced by a raw, naked contempt. "So what?" she hissed, her face ugly with it. "So what? You talk about that stupid watch like it's the crown jewels. It was junk. Old, scratched junk. History doesn't pay the bills, Elizabeth." She used my name, not Mom. Elizabeth. "You are living in the past, in this museum of yours. Me and Matthew, we are the future. You don't understand value. You don't understand brand. You are just a bitter old woman clinging to things that don't matter. You're irrelevant." She was spitting the words at me, insulting Papa Nestor, insulting Robert, insulting my entire life's work. She was trying to make me small, to make me feel worthless and outdated. And then she laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "You think you can cut us off? And that's the end of it?" she sneered. "You are so naive. You're old. You're not going to live forever." I froze. The air in the kitchen went still. Even Matthew seemed shocked by that. He took a small step away from his wife. "You think you can change your will? Go ahead and try," Valerie continued, her voice a low, venomous promise. "You would never leave your only son with nothing. You're too weak. You love him too much." She stepped closer to me, getting right in my face, her eyes blazing. "And when Matthew inherits," she whispered, "I inherit all of this house, the company, every single dime. It's all going to be ours anyway. You cutting off a credit card is just a minor inconvenience." She said it. She said the quiet part out loud, the full plan, the full monstrous greed. She didn't just want my money. She wanted everything. She wanted my life's work. She wanted me gone. And just like that, it was over. All the fear, all the hesitation, all the grief I had felt, it evaporated. It was burned away by the cold, hard truth. All that was left was clarity. I looked right into her eyes. "Get out," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in the kitchen. Valerie blinked, then smirked. "What? Are you kicking me out?" "I am kicking you both out," I said, and this time I looked at Matthew. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Elizabeth," he started, his voice pleading. "Mom, just calm down." "Don't call me Mom," I cut him off. "The mother you knew, the woman who would have forgiven you for anything, she died last night. She died in those 38 seconds of Nellance. Now, as the owner of this house and the CEO of my company, I am telling you both to leave. Immediately." I pointed to the front door. I wasn't shaking anymore. I felt tall. I felt like Elizabeth Montero, the founder, the survivor. Valerie stared at me, searching my face for any sign of weakness, and for the first time she found none. She grabbed Matthew's arm, yanking him. "See?" I told you, your mother is a controlling witch, she shrieked as she dragged him through the living room, past the scattered mail and the broken vase. Matthew went with her, like a sheep, head down. He never once looked back at me. I followed them to the door. As Valerie stepped out onto the porch, she turned back, the cold December wind whipping her perfect hair around her faces. Her eyes were full of a hatred so pure it was terrifying. "You will regret this, Elizabeth," she hissed. "You will pay for this. I'm not going to let you ruin my life. You'll see." It was a threat. It was a promise. Then they got in their car and sped away, tires squealing on the pavement, leaving me alone in my empty, violated house. I shut the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I leaned my back against the door, my legs finally starting to shake. I slid down to the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm had passed, but I knew, looking at the mess around me, the real fight had only just begun. I was exhausted, completely drained, but I was resolute. For the first time in a very long time, I knew exactly what I had to do. After they left, I didn't cry. The exhaustion hit me like a physical weight, but underneath it, there was a cold, sharp clarity. Valerie's final words, "You will regret this," kept echoing in the silence of my ransacked home. It wasn't just an angry outburst. I knew it was a promise. I knew what she was. The very first thing I did, before I even cleaned up the broken vase, before I even called Olivia, was to call a 24-hour emergency security company. I wasn't just a sad mother anymore. I was a target. Within an hour, a man in a jumpsuit was on my doorstep. The sound of a high-pitched metal drill biting into my oak door frame filled the night. It was a sharp, screeching noise, but to me it sounded like a symphony. He worked methodically, replacing every lock, every deadbolt, even the keypad on the garage, and the flimsy lock on the back patio door that I had always meant to fix. He handed me a set of new shining keys, heavy in my palm. They felt different. They felt like power. When I put the key in the new deadbolt and turned it, the sound of the heavy, oiled metal sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I turned the bolt, leaned my head against the door, and took my first full breath. It was the first time in over a year that I was truly, completely safe in my own home. I had locked the monster out. The next morning, at 8:12 a.m. sharp, I was at Olivia's house. I hadn't slept, but I was running on pure cold adrenaline. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and just handed me a mug of black coffee. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered a plan. "She has a name," Olivia said. "Her name is Miss Davenport. She's the best family law and asset attorney in the state. She's not warm, Elizabeth. She's a shark." I nodded. I didn't need warm. Warm is what got me into this mess. I needed a shark. By 10:00 a.m., I was sitting in a plush, intimidatingly quiet office overlooking the city. And I had brought my ledger. I didn't walk in as a broken-hearted mother. I walked in as a CEO presenting a hostile takeover. I laid it all out. The $1.7 million, with the itemized spreadsheet I'd printed, the story of Papa Nestor's watch, the overheard phone call, the ransacked house, and finally, the threat. Miss Davenport listened. She didn't interrupt. She just made small, precise notes on a yellow legal pad. She didn't offer me a tissue. When I was finished, she just looked at me with clear, intelligent eyes and said, "This is clear-cut financial abuse, conspiracy to defraud, and with the threat, potential elder intimidation. We can act. We will act. That was all I needed to hear. Miss Davenport's first move was to protect me physically. She said, "A lock is a deterrent. A camera is evidence." That same afternoon, a different kind of team arrived at my house. These weren't just locksmiths, they were security specialists. They were quiet, efficient, and they saw vulnerabilities I never knew existed. They installed small, almost invisible, high-definition cameras at every entryway, every blind spot covering the driveway, the front porch, the back gate. They installed motion-sensitive floodlights that would turn my backyard into a baseball stadium if a cat so much as walked across it. They wired everything to my phone and my iPad. That night, I sat on my sofa, the same sofa where I had felt like a guest, and I watched the monitors. I could see every angle of my property, clear as day. It was a strange, conflicting feeling. On one hand, it felt like an invasion, to have my home, my sanctuary, wired for surveillance. But underneath that, I felt a control I hadn't realized I'd lost. My house was now a fortress. I had spent so much money and energy trying to make it a welcoming home for them, never realizing the whole time I should have been building ramparts. While the technicians were drilling and running wires, I found myself walking through the house, just looking at it. I went into the guest bathroom, the one I'd had remodeled just a few months ago. My hand rested on the sleek chrome grab bar I'd insisted they install by the shower. I remember thinking about the future, about aging in place, about making the house safe for myself as I got older. I was so worried about slipping in the shower. I was preparing for an accidental fall, a physical risk. The irony of it just hit me so hard. We spend all this time and money making our homes safe from physical dangers, non-slip mats, fire alarms, those little nightlights, but we have absolutely no defenses, no grab bars for the emotional predators, the ones who don't slip and fall, but who push you. Don't you find that strange? We prepare for the what if of an accident, but not the what if of a betrayal. If you also believe your home should be your one true safe harbor, just comment safe below. I had to fight to make mine safe again. The next step was the money. On Ms. Davenport's explicit advice, I drove to a different bank, a credit union across town where I had no history, where no one in my family would ever think to look. I sat down with the manager and opened a new private account in my name and my name only. Then began the meticulous, tedious process of moving the majority of my liquid assets, my personal savings, everything that wasn't tied directly to the business, into that new, secure account. It was a mountain of paperwork, but with every signature, I felt a piece of my power returning. I signed a document prepared by my lawyer, formally revoking any and all power of attorney I might have ever signed for Matthew in a moment of naive trust. Then I called my insurance agent. That $320,000 BMW, it was still in my name. I was paying the insurance on it. I told the agent I was taking my son off the policy. Then I made another call. I had the car repossessed. I asked them to please retrieve it that day. I didn't care how humiliated Valerie would be. Humiliation is a very small price to pay for $1.7 million. The hardest part was the company, my business, my legacy, my life. Matthew was the vice president, a title I had proudly given him. This was not a home matter. This was a corporate matter. I called an emergency meeting with my CFO and my corporate counsel. I sat at the head of the long conference table I'd bought in 1998, and I thought about the 2008 recession. I remembered the nights I didn't sleep, the agonizing decisions I had to make, the good people I had to let go to keep the company from sinking. It was brutal, but it saved us. I looked at my CFO and I realized I was in the same position. I was saving my company from a different kind of virus, one that had been growing from the inside. I didn't give them the emotional story. I gave them the facts. I presented the company credit card statements, the $120,000 bracelet, the trips, the dinners, all coded as client entertainment. My CFO, a man who has been with me for 20 years, didn't even flinch. He just understood. We were in agreement. This was a breach of fiduciary duty. We immediately revoked Matthew's access to all company accounts, canceled his corporate cards, and put him on an indefinite, unpaid suspension, effective immediately, pending a full audit. It was a surgical cut, clean, precise, and absolutely necessary. The final step was the digital wall. That night, I sat alone in my office, my secure, locked down office. I held my phone in my hand. It was a war zone. Hundreds of missed calls, a flood of text messages from Matthew, from Valerie, and even from Grace. They had clearly realized the car was gone. The texts were a dizzying, sick cycle of emotions, pleading, "Mom, what are you doing? This is a mistake. Please call me." Cursing, "You are a bitter, evil witch, Elizabeth." Threats, "You are destroying this family. You will be all alone." I took a deep breath and I pressed block. I blocked Valerie's number. I blocked Grace's number. And then I typed in Matthew's name. My thumb hovered over the button. This was the hardest part. This felt like an amputation. It felt like cutting off a part of my own body. But I looked at the messages again. This wasn't communication. This was just another open door for manipulation, for abuse, for the guilt trips to get in. I pressed the button, blocked. I was finally stopping them from planting more doubt in my head. I was reclaiming my mental space. The phone in my hand went silent. My house was silent. And for the first time, it was a safe silence. I was still getting used to the silence in my house. A new kind of yiggance, one that was protected by fresh deadbolts and security cameras. My nerves were still raw. Every time a car slowed down on the street, I would flinch, my heart jumping into my throat. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, there was a knock at the front door. It wasn't the angry pounding I was half expecting. It was a gentle, polite tap, tap, tap. I froze. I didn't move from my chair. I just stared at the iPad screen, at the live feed from the front door camera. It was Mrs. Martha, my neighbor from 2 houses down. A retired nurse, a widow like me, always busy with her rose garden. She was standing on my porch, holding a small plate covered in aluminum foil. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the intercom button. Finally, I unbolted the door. Her face was etched with genuine worry. She said she had heard some commotion a few days ago, the day of the fight. She said she didn't want to be nosy, but she felt she needed to come and check if I was all right. She held out the plate. It was a small pecan pie, still warm from her oven. She said I looked tired. It was such a simple, neighborly kindness, and it just about broke me. After being treated like an enemy in my own home, this small act of grace from someone who was practically a stranger, it meant everything. I invited her in for tea. We sat in my kitchen, the one that had been a war zone just days before, and I found myself talking. I didn't plan to. The words just came tumbling out. I didn't tell her about the $1.7 million. I told her about the feeling of being erased. I told her about Robert's picture being taken down. I told her about the broken watch. Mrs. Martha just listened, her head nodding, her eyes holding no judgment, only a deep, quiet understanding. When I finished, my voice trailing off, she set her teacup down and put her warm, slightly wrinkled hand over mine. She said she'd seen it. She said our generation, we were taught to sacrifice, to give, to hold the family together, and that the generation now, sometimes they take that for granted. She said, Elizabeth, you built all of this. You don't let anyone make you feel small in your own legacy. Her words, coming from someone with no stake in this, no angle, they were like an anchor. She didn't see me as an ATM. She saw me as a person. For the first time in months, I felt seen. After Mrs. Martha left, Olivia came over, my sister. She's always been the fire to my water. She didn't bring pie. She brought a leather-bound notebook and a righteous, furious energy. I spoke to the lawyer, were the first words out of her mouth as she marched into the kitchen. She needs a timeline. I've already started it. Olivia paced my kitchen floor, her anger a tangible thing, a gift. We are going to log every single receipt, every manipulative text, every time Grace made a sideways comment about your curtains. Her anger was the anger I had been too shocked and hurt to feel myself. It reminded me of who I was before Valerie. It reminded me of how we were raised, of Papa Nestor. He would not have stood for this disrespect for one single second, Liz, she said, her eyes flashing. And neither will we. Seeing her there, ready to go to war for me, I felt my spine straighten. I wasn't that hunched victim at the kitchen table anymore. That night, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I slept. A deep, dreamless, heavy sleep. I wasn't alone anymore. Between the gentle kindness of my neighbor, the fierce fire of my sister, and the sharp clinical precision of my lawyer, I had a team. Valerie and Matthew thought they had isolated me. They thought I was just a sad, lonely old woman they could easily discard. They were wrong. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my kindness for stupidity. They didn't realize that women like us, women of my generation, we know how to build foundations, and we also know how to protect them. It's amazing, isn't it, how a single cup of tea with a neighbor or a visit from a friend can completely change your perspective. It reminds you that you are still seen. Have you ever had that moment when a friend showed up at the exact second you needed them most? If you know that powerful feeling, just comment friend below. It's a simple word, but it means the world. After the confrontation, after the locks were changed and the cameras installed, the house felt different. It was quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the lonely quiet I had felt before. It was a peaceful quiet. It was the sound of my own life, waiting to be lived. I had spent so many weeks feeling like a target, reacting to his moves, anticipating the next crisis. Now, with my lawyer's preparations moving forward, there was a strange stillness. It was in this stillness that I finally found the energy to do what I had put off for months, to clean. It started as a simple desire to clear the air, to reclaim the space as my own. I went room by room, dusting surfaces that hadn't been touched in ages, washing windows to let in more light. It felt good. It felt like I was physically wiping away the residue of the past. Finally, I decided to tackle the big one, my late husband Robert's study. It was the last room I hadn't touched, the one I kept closed, a sort of shrine. But I knew that to move forward, I had to sort through what was left behind. I wasn't getting rid of his memory, Lord, no. But I couldn't live in a museum. I spent the morning sorting through old suits for donation, boxing up books for the library. Then I turned to his old, heavy oak desk. The bottom drawer had always been stuffed with miscellaneous papers, old tax returns, expired warranties, manuals for appliances we didn't even own anymore. I pulled the drawer all the way out, intending to dump its contents into a trash bag. As I set the heavy drawer on the floor, I noticed something stuck in the back of the cabinet's empty space. It was a large manila envelope, warped and yellowed at the edges. It must have slipped behind the drawer years ago. I reached in, my fingers brushing against the dusty wood, and pulled it out. My first thought was that it was just more old papers, but as I turned it over, I saw it wasn't addressed to Robert. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was just there. Curiosity, more than anything, made me open it. I sat on the floor of the study, the smell of old paper and dust in the air. Inside was not a single document, but a stack of papers, folded together. The first one I unfolded was a printout of an email. My breath caught. The email was dated 3 years ago. 3 years, while Robert was still alive, while he was sick. It was from my son to the woman he had just secretly married. I read the words, and the floor seemed to fall away from me. He was complaining about the cost of his father's medical care. He wrote, "We're pouring money down the drain. The inheritance is going to be gone before we ever see a dime." My stomach twisted. There was a reply from her, suggesting they look into options. I kept reading, page after page. It was a meticulous record of their intentions. They had been planning this, not for weeks, not for months, for years. I saw printouts of my bank statements. I had no idea how he had gotten them. I saw a long email chain between him and a financial advisor I'd never heard of, discussing ways to protect assets in the event of parental incapacity. He was actively researching how to have me declared incompetent. He had looked up my doctor's name, my prescriptions. He was building a case against my mind. The air in the room felt thick, unbreathable. This wasn't a desperate son making bad decisions. This was a cold, calculated, long-term strategy. This was evil. There's no other word for it. They had mapped out my decline. They had discussed which assets to liquidate first. They had drafts of letters, unsigned, trying to gain power of attorney. This was a blueprint for stealing my life. The shock I felt on the phone days ago was nothing compared to this. This was a different kind of pain, a deeper, more chilling betrayal. It was the realization that the son I loved hadn't just been lost. He had been a predator, waiting patiently. I sat there for I don't know how long. The first wave of sickness passed, and something new replaced it. It was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. It was pure, cold clarity. All the doubt, all the lingering guilt, all the tiny voices in my head that whispered, "Maybe you were too hard on him." They all went silent. The truth was right here, in my hands, in black and white. I didn't cry. I got up from the floor, my knees popping, and walked to the kitchen. I laid each piece of paper flat on the counter, my hand which had been trembling, was now perfectly steady. I took out my smartphone, the one my granddaughter had insisted I get. I opened the scanning app she had shown me, the one I thought I'd never use. One by one, I captured a perfect, clear digital image of every single page: the emails, the bank statements, the research into my sanity. I bundled them into a single PDF file. I opened my email, typed in my lawyer's address, and wrote one sentence in the subject line: "The proof you wanted." I hit send. Then I carefully, meticulously, folded every document just as I had found it. I slid the papers back into the yellowed manila envelope. I went back to the study, pushed the envelope into the dark, dusty space behind the file drawer, and slid the drawer back into place. It shut with a heavy, final thud. He didn't know it existed. He had forgotten it, a piece of his own sloppy, arrogant planning. He would never know that I had found it. It was my secret now. It wasn't just proof. It was a weapon. And I knew with absolute certainty that it was the very thing that would save me. After I hit send on that email to my lawyer, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no surge of victory. There was only a profound, bone-deep weariness. The shock, the anger, the cold calculation of scanning those documents, it had all drained me dry. The house was safe now. The locks were changed, but it felt hollow. I found myself just walking, aimlessly, my hand drifting along the cool plaster of the hallway wall. I stopped in the living room, in front of the fireplace. Right there, over the mantel, was where our wedding photograph used to hang. Valerie had taken it down months ago, saying it made the room look like a museum. Now, all that was left was a faint, pale rectangle on the wallpaper, a ghostly scar where our happiness had once lived. It hit me then. I had been fighting for the house, for Nestor's legacy, for the company. But I had forgotten to fight for him, for Robert. I walked into my bedroom. She hadn't thrown it away, at least. She had graciously stored it for me. It was leaning against the wall in the corner, a thin film of dust settling on the glass. I picked it up, my fingers wiping away the gray haze. And there we were, Robert and me, 1980, so young. He was beaming, his eyes sparkling with that light he always had, and his smile, oh, that smile. He had always believed in me, even when I was just a young woman with ideas that probably sounded too big for my britches. "You're going to conquer the world, Elizabeth," he used to say, "and I'm just going to be right here, cheering you on." I sank down to the floor, right there in the corner, and pulled the frame into my lap. I hugged it to my chest, and I finally cried. It wasn't the heaving, angry sob of that first night. It was a quiet, aching cry, a cry of missing him, of a profound, suffocating regret. I let her do that. I let that woman, that stranger, desecrate his memory. I let our son forget what a magnificent man his father was. "I'm so sorry, Robert," I whispered to the cold glass. "I'm so sorry I let it get this bad." I must have sat there for a long time, the room slowly dimming as the sun went down. But as I stared at Robert's face, I didn't feel any blame coming from him. I didn't hear a word of disappointment. I just heard him. I heard his warm, steady voice in my memory. I remembered all those late nights when I was drowning in spreadsheets for the company, and he would just appear at my side with a hot cup of tea, not saying a word, just sitting with me. I remembered how he held my hand at Nestor's funeral, a silent, solid presence that was stronger than any thousand words of comfort. Robert was never a weak man. He was kind, but he was not weak. He had a quiet, unshakable steel, and I realized, sitting there in the dark, what he would be saying to me right now. He wouldn't be telling me to get revenge. He would be telling me to protect what we built together, to protect the son we loved, even now, from the darkness that had taken him over, and most of all, to protect myself. It was so clear. I could almost feel his hand on my shoulder, that familiar, comforting weight. Love doesn't die. It just changes shape. A new kind of strength started to seep back into me. It wasn't the cold fury from before. It was a calm, steady resolve. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was our fight. Valerie was so wrong about everything. She thought the legacy was in a Rolex watch or the number in a bank account. She didn't understand what a legacy really was. The legacy was Nestor's old watch, a symbol of hard work. The legacy was this wedding photo, a symbol of 40 years of love and commitment. The legacy was this house, built with our own two hands and filled with so much laughter. I pushed myself up, my knees creaking, but my legs felt steadier. I walked back into the living room, and I put Robert's picture back where it belonged, right in the center of the mantel. "I'm not letting anyone take you down again," I said to him. The exhaustion was gone. The fear was too. I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for our honor. After I found that box, after I placed Robert's photograph back on the mantel, I thought, perhaps, the worst was over. I was wrong. It had been weeks since I'd changed the locks, weeks since I'd heard from my son. The silence was profound. No more angry texts, no 2 a.m. calls, no fake apologies. That silence, as it turned out, was 1,000 times more terrifying than the screaming. It was the silence of a predator gathering its strength. And then it came. It arrived on a Tuesday, not as a text, not as a voicemail. It was a pale gray official-looking envelope from Dallas County. My name and address were printed in a cold, impersonal font. It wasn't from the court, not yet. It was from Adult Protective Services, APS. My heart didn't just drop. It felt like it seized in my chest, a cold fist closing around it. I tore it open. The letter stated that they had received a report of concern regarding my health and well-being. Someone, an anonymous but credible source, had filed a complaint. The words leaped off the page, each one a separate sting. Signs of self-neglect, apparent cognitive decline, social isolation, paranoia, self-neglect. I looked around my spotless living room, the sunlight catching the dust-free wood of the floors. Cognitive decline? I had just successfully negotiated the new terms for our company's shipping contracts over a 3-hour Zoom call yesterday morning. I knew instantly with a chilling certainty. This was her move. This was Valerie. They couldn't get my money with threats and manipulation, so now they were coming for my mind. They were going to paint me as a senile old woman, lock me away, and take everything. My hands were shaking so hard, I could barely dial the number. I called my lawyer. I had to read the letter to her twice because my voice was trembling so badly. She wasn't surprised. "This is it, Elizabeth," she said, her voice hard as steel, cutting through my panic. "This is a common and a disgustingly dirty tactic. They are building a paper trail. They want a government agency to officially declare you incapable of caring for yourself." She explained the legal nightmare that was unfolding. If APS, Even with the best intentions, found their lies credible, Valerie and Matthew could take that report straight to a probate judge and petition for an emergency guardianship. Guardianship. The word itself felt like a tomb. It meant I would cease to be a person. I would become a ward. They would get control of everything: my finances, my medical decisions, where I lived, who I was allowed to see. They could sell this house. They could stop me from seeing my friends. They could put me in a home. They would turn me into a child in my own life, a ghost in my own home, while they legally bled my accounts dry. A hot, sick wave of fury washed over me, so potent it momentarily burned away the fear. What do we do? I asked, my voice no longer trembling. A social worker, a tired-looking young woman named Miss Davis, came to my house the following Wednesday. My lawyer had been very clear. Be cooperative, but be smart. Let her in, but you must record the entire conversation. I want you to tell her you are recording for your own records. I did just that. My phone was on the coffee table between us, its red recording light glowing faintly. Miss Davis was polite, but she was working from a checklist. I could feel the invisible boxes she was trying to tick. Mrs. Montero, do you find yourself frequently forgetting what you're doing or where you are? Do you have trouble managing your daily medications? The report says you often miss meals. Can you tell me what you had for breakfast? Are you feeling lonely or isolated since your husband's passing? It was an interrogation disguised as concern. Every question was a trap, a loaded weapon. I could see the narrative Valerie had spun for them. The poor, grieving widow, alone in this big house, starting to slip, confusing her memories and lashing out at her loving, concerned family who only wanted to help. I answered each question with cold, precise calm. No, I am on no daily medications other than a multivitamin. For breakfast, I had one hard-boiled egg, a piece of whole wheat toast with avocado, and black coffee. For lunch, I plan to have the leftover salmon from last night. No, Miss Davis, I am not lonely. I am selective about the company I keep. My isolation is a deliberate choice of self-preservation. Then, after 20 minutes of her questions, I decided it was my turn. Miss Davis, I said, my voice even, I understand why you are here. My daughter-in-law, Valerie Montero, and my son Matthew filed this report, correct? She looked startled by my directness, shifting in her seat. I'm not at liberty to... Of course you are, I interrupted, but politely. They are concerned that I might cut them off. They are concerned about my spending and my state of mind. Let me show you why I've cut them off. I had prepared a file. I slid it across the coffee table. This, I said, is a copy of a credit card statement in my name that my daughter-in-law used for $410,000 in charges. This is the invoice for the $850,000 wedding they forgot to invite me to. This is a photo of an heirloom watch, my late father's, that my daughter-in-law sold. And then I gave her the finale. And this, I said, tapping the last stack of papers, is a printout of her 5-year plan to have me declared incompetent and seize my assets, complete with the research on my doctors and financial holdings. This was from the box I found. I watched her face as she read. Her professional mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Her eyes widened, her mouth parting slightly. She was no longer looking at me like a confused, senile old woman. She was looking at me like the victim of a sophisticated, horrifying crime. My goodness, she whispered, looking up at me. My goodness. She took meticulous notes. She thanked me for my candor, and she left, promising her report would reflect the full context of the situation. I thought I had won. I thought it was over. But just 2 days later, my lawyer called, and her voice was clipped. Urgent. They're not stopping, Elizabeth. They've realized they lost the battle with APS, so they're escalating. They just filed an ex parte petition with the court, demanding an emergency psychiatric evaluation. I sank into my chair. On what grounds? I yelled into the phone. After what I showed that social worker? On what grounds? And this was the most diabolical, twisted part of their plan. They're using the pandemic, my lawyer said, her voice tight with anger. Their petition claims you contracted COVID-19 back in 2021. They are arguing that, like so many seniors, they even had the nerve to quote the CDC statistic that 81% of deaths were in people over 65. You are suffering from severe, undiagnosed, post-COVID cognitive decline. I remembered that year. The fear, the isolation, the constant news reports of people my age dying alone. And they were using it. They claim, she continued, that your brain fog and new onset paranoia are the real reasons you've suddenly changed your will and kicked your loving family out of the house. They're twisting a global health crisis to make you sound insane. A wave of nausea so profound it made me gag washed over me. They were turning my life, my love for Robert, my business acumen, into the symptoms of a brain disease. And it gets worse, my lawyer said. They are requesting a specific doctor to perform the evaluation, a Dr. Alastair Finch. She paused. I know that name, Elizabeth. He's a hired gun. He has a reputation in the legal community for providing incapacity diagnoses for a hefty fee. He's a professional character assassin. They're trying to buy a legal death sentence for your autonomy. The plan was laid bare. Force me into an appointment with their paid-for doctor, have him declare me incompetent, and a judge would grant Matthew, and therefore Valerie, emergency guardianship before I could even fight back. I was completely and utterly cornered. The rage was so total, so pure, it was almost paralyzing. They can't, I whispered. Oh, they're trying, my lawyer shot back. But we are not going to let this happen. We can't refuse the evaluation outright. That makes us look like we're hiding something. So instead, we are going to agree, but on our terms. Within an hour, she had drafted and filed our response. We didn't just reject Dr. Finch. We rejected him on the grounds of clear and demonstrable professional bias, a move that put him on notice. And then, we didn't just agree to an evaluation. We demanded a fully independent, court-appointed panel of 3 neuropsychologists from a major reputable hospital system, unaffiliated with either party. We stated in the filing that I had absolutely nothing to hide and welcomed the opportunity to prove my lucidity and put an end to this campaign of harassment. It was a high-stakes gamble. We were calling their bluff in front of a judge. 2 agonizing weeks later, the court agreed. I found myself in a cold, sterile, windowless hospital conference room, sitting across a long table from 3 neuropsychologists. They weren't my friends. They were scientists. And the exam lasted for 6 hours. It was grueling. They tested everything. They made me remember a list of 15 unrelated words: river, cabbage, queen, silver, 18, and then asked me to recall them 30 minutes later after a battery of other tests. They gave me complex logic puzzles, spatial reasoning tests, and math problems. They had me draw a clock face with the hands pointing to 10 minutes past 3, a test I knew was designed to spot dementia. I drew the most precise, perfect clock I could, and then, after hours of mental gymnastics, they asked me about my family. Mrs. Montero, the lead doctor asked, his face a perfect neutral mask. Why do you believe that your son and daughter-in-law are conspiring against you? I took a sip of water. I looked him right in the eye. I did not speak like a wounded emotional mother. I spoke like the CEO I am. I laid out the facts, one by one. Fact 1, $1.7 million in unauthorized expenditures. Fact 2, a documented 5-year plan to seize my assets. Fact 3, the theft and sale of a family heirloom. Fact 4, a 38-second phone call where they confirmed their intentions by refusing to deny them. I was rational. I was precise. I was, for lack of a better word, sane. I don't remember driving home. I got into bed and I slept for 14 hours straight. The week I spent waiting for the panel's results was 1,000 times worse than the 6-hour exam. Every time the phone rang, I jumped. Finally, my lawyer called. I almost couldn't answer. "Elizabeth?" she said. I heard a sound in her voice I had never heard before, a smile. "You didn't just pass," she said. "You passed with flying colors." She said the panel had written a scathing 3-page report. They concluded that I possessed superior intelligence, was fully lucid and oriented, and was currently, and understandably, suffering from extreme psychological distress as a direct result of targeted, long-term financial and emotional abuse by family members. They added, in a final beautiful sentence, that my actions, changing the locks, blocking their numbers, and hiring legal counsel were not in fact signs of paranoia, but were entirely rational and necessary steps for self-preservation. Their dirtiest, most vicious tactic had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. They had tried to lock me in a medical cage, to label me confused, sick, and old. But they had underestimated me. They thought I was just a weak old woman. They forgot I was the woman who built this empire in the first place. The court threw out their petition for guardianship immediately. The APS report was closed, and that 3-page medical report, that was my evidence now. They had tried to prove I was insane, and instead, they had just handed me a court-stamped, expert-certified certificate of sanity. I knew Valerie wouldn't stop. I knew the final battle was still to come, but now she could never again hide behind the disgusting lie of concern for my health. The game had changed, and I was ready. That victory, the one from the psychiatric evaluation, gave me only the briefest moment of peace. I had proven I was sane, but I was learning quickly that when you back a greedy animal into a corner, it doesn't just give up, it just changes its weapons. This time, it came officially. A uniformed man, a process server, came right to my front door and handed me a thick stack of documents. I had been served. After failing to prove I was insane, Valerie and Matthew had pivoted. They were suing me, not for guardianship, for money. The lawsuit was so ridiculous it would have been funny if it wasn't in my hands. They were accusing me of intentional infliction of emotional distress. They claimed that my abrupt financial cutoff had damaged Valerie's reputation, ruined her brand as an influencer, and caused her to lose lucrative contracts. They even shamelessly claimed I had breached an implied agreement to financially support their family indefinitely. They were demanding damages. The number actually made me laugh. A sharp, bitter sound. $5 million. I was back in my lawyer's office, the papers spread between us. She read through the complaint, her face a perfect emotionless mask. She pushed her glasses up, took a sip of coffee, and looked at me. A desperation move, she said flatly. This suit is full of holes. They have zero proof of any implied agreement, and her lost contracts are speculative and impossible to prove. She explained it was a common, ugly game. They weren't suing to win. They were suing to scare. They're making a bet, Elizabeth, she continued, lacing her fingers together. They're betting that you're a 67-year-old, wealthy, and tired woman. They're betting you'll do anything to avoid a public, messy trial. They're betting that your love for Matthew will make you unable to bear watching him be destroyed on the stand. They are betting that you will pay them to go away. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. Are they right? Just as she predicted, their lawyer called hers 3 days later. They wanted to mediate. They've made an offer, my lawyer said when she called me, her voice dripping with irony. They said that, in the interest of family harmony, they are willing to settle this quietly. They will drop the $5 million lawsuit. I waited, silent. In exchange, she continued, they are requesting a single one-time payment of $1.7 million, the exact amount you said they took, as a parting gift for Matthew. They also want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and they want the BMW restored to Valerie. I couldn't believe the audacity. They were demanding I pay them the very money they had stolen, plus the car. They were trying to turn their theft into a legitimate settlement. They wanted me to sign a piece of paper that effectively agreed the $1.7 million was theirs to take. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a cold, sharp final sound. In that moment, all the anxiety, all the lingering fear, it just evaporated. All that was left was absolute cold clarity. No, I said. I beg your pardon? My lawyer asked. The answer is no. No compromise. Not $1. No NDA. No car. Tell them we are not only rejecting their offer, we are countersuing. There was a beat of silence, and then I heard her smile through the phone. I like that, she said. We'll countersue for the full $0.7 million plus damages for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Do it, I said. This means we're going to court, Elizabeth, she warned. It will be public. It will be stressful. They will say terrible things about you, about Matthew. I know, I said, my voice steady. I'm ready. My family's legacy is not for sale, and neither is my dignity. The night before the first court hearing, my lawyer's conference room was lit up against the dark skyline. It looked like a war room. It was me, Olivia, and the legal team. Stacks of binders were organized on the table. The APS report, the full psychiatric evaluation, the bank statements, the credit card bills, and most importantly, the pristine printouts from the secret box. We went over everything. My lawyer played the role of their attorney, cross-examining me without mercy. Mrs. Montero, isn't it true you were jealous of your beautiful young daughter-in-law? Isn't it true you've always used your money to control your son, and you're just angry he finally stood up to you? She threw every possible accusation at me. Olivia sat beside me, her hand gripping mine under the table. At first, my voice was shaky, but after an hour, it became strong. I wasn't emotional. I just stated the facts. 1.7 million, the 5-year plan, the 38 seconds of silence. When we finally finished, it was almost midnight. The anxiety was gone. All that was left was a heavy, calm stillness. I wasn't a mother trying to punish her son. I was a business owner, protecting my life's work and my family's honor from con artists. And tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom. Walking into that courtroom, I felt like I was walking a tightrope stretched over a canyon. The air was thick and still, heavy with a tension you could almost taste. It smelled like old, polished mahogany and stacks of paper. Olivia gripped my elbow, her hand a small, warm point of stability in the swirling anxiety. And then I saw them. Across the aisle, sitting next to their lawyer, were Valerie and Matthew. Valerie was a portrait of calculated innocence, dressed in a modest, pale beige suit, her hair pulled back in a neat, simple bun. She was playing the part of the young, wronged, respectable wife. Matthew sat beside her, a husk. His eyes were fixed on the floor. His skin looked gray and sallow. In the front row, right behind them, sat her mother, Grace, who stared at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. But as I sat down at our table, next to my shark, a strange calm settled over me. I had done everything I could. Now, it was time for the truth to speak. Valerie's lawyer went first. It was pure theater. He painted a masterpiece of lies. He described me as a wealthy, domineering, and controlling widow who couldn't let go of her only son. He spoke of my jealousy of my new daughter-in-law. He tried to dig up the APS report, even though it had been dismissed, hinting that I was confused and prone to agitation. Then Valerie herself took the stand, and she cried. Fat, perfect tears rolled down her beautifully made-up face. She spoke about how she had loved me, how she had tried so hard to be the daughter I never had. She choked up as she described how my sudden financial cutoff had destroyed her reputation and her budding influencer career, causing her to have a nervous breakdown. She said all she ever wanted was a happy family, but my suffocating overprotection had ruined everything. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. But the hardest part, the part that felt like a physical blow, was when they called Matthew, my son. He walked to the stand, and he would not look at me, not once. He repeated his wife's lies, his voice small and unconvincing, but the words themselves were like knives. He said I hadn't been the same since I got COVID. He said I had become paranoid and bitter. He said he was scared for my mental health. He said the watch was just an unfortunate accident and that I had wildly overreacted, sitting there, listening to my own child, the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, perjure himself in a court to protect the woman who had manipulated him. My heart didn't break. It just hardened. The pain calcified into steel. I knew in that moment, with absolute certainty, that my son was gone. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood up. She wasn't theatrical. She was called precise and surgical. She started with Matthew. Mr. Montero, you testified that you were scared for your mother's well-being. Where were you, sir, for the 38 seconds? Matthew blinked. What 38 seconds? The 38 seconds, my lawyer repeated, her voice cutting through the silence. When your wife threw your family's 100-year-old legacy on the floor and called it junk, you sat silent, Is that the action of a concerned son? Matthew started to stammer. I I was in shock. Or were you complicit? She didn't wait for an answer. She moved on, introducing the psychiatric evaluation, the one that proved I was fully lucid. She introduced the APS report, the one that concluded I was a victim. With every question, Matthew sank lower in his chair. Then she turned to Valerie. Miss Sandoral, you claim your career was destroyed? A career as an influencer. Valerie nodded, trying to muster fresh tears. Yes, I lost so many contracts. Which contracts? My lawyer interrupted. Please show the court evidence of one contract, just one, that was lost as a direct result of my client's actions. Valerie's mouth opened and closed. She had nothing. Then my lawyer began the projection. One by one, the credit card statements, $410,000. Is this family support, Miss Sandoral, or is this parasitic draining? This $120,000 bracelet, was that a business expense for your brand? And this $850,000 wedding, do you have any idea how hard Mrs. Montero worked for that money? Valerie started to lose her composure. She agreed. She wanted us to be happy. Or, my lawyer shot back, was she just desperate to keep her son? Finally, my lawyer picked up one last binder. Your Honor, we have one final exhibit. She looked at Valerie, whose face had gone chalk white. Miss Sandoral, do you recognize these emails? She put them on the large screen for the entire courtroom to see. The 5-year plan, the words, her words, lit up the room. Phase 1, charm and isolate. Target, Elizabeth Montero's son, weak, needs affection. Fat cow, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. I saw Valerie's lawyer bury his face in his hands. Grace, in the back row, looked like she was going to faint. And Valerie, she just stared at the screen. Her beautiful, angelic face twisted into a mask of pure reptilian hatred and panic. She was naked. She was exposed. The defense calls Elizabeth Montero. I walked to the stand. My legs were steady. I did not look at Valerie. I did not look at Matthew. I looked only at the judge. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to scream. I simply told my story. I told them about Nestor, who taught me the value of hard work. I told them about Robert, who built a life with me. I told them about the watch, not as an old trinket, but as a symbol. And then I told them about the 38 seconds of silence. I told the court that my $1.7 million countersuit wasn't just about the money. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and strong, this is about the truth. It's about the fact that someone cannot walk into your home, eat your food, take your money, destroy your legacy, and then call you the villain. This is my line. The judge was an older woman with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a face that had seen everything. She had listened to every word without a flicker of emotion. Now she looked down from the bench. She said that in her 20 years on the bench, she had rarely seen a case of such calculated, malicious fraud and emotional manipulation. She spoke directly to Valerie and Matthew. She called their actions despicable and a clear textbook case of elder abuse. She completely dismissed their $5 million lawsuit, calling it frivolous and without merit. And then she granted my countersuit in full. She ordered Valerie and Matthew to repay the entire $1.7 million. She then added a permanent restraining order, forbidding them from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of me ever again. The judge's gavel came down. Crack! The sound was louder, more final than the shattering of the watch. It was the sound of justice. When I stood up, my legs trembling, Olivia threw her arms around me, and this time I cried, not from pain, not from anger, from relief. It's been a year since the day I walked out of that courtroom. 6 months ago, I sold the house, the one Robert and I built, the one I fought so hard to protect. But I realized I wasn't fighting for the bricks and mortar. I was fighting for my honor. And once I had that back, I didn't need the house anymore. It held too many memories, both beautiful and painful. I moved to a bright, smaller apartment in a different city, closer to the sea. Here, I can hear the waves instead of the echoes of shouting. I wake up every morning to sunlight streaming in, not a crushing weight on my chest. I use some of the money from the sale to book that Alaskan cruise Olivia and I always dreamed of. I hear, through my lawyers, that the court is in the process of seizing Valerie and Matthew's assets to enforce the $1.7 million judgment. I don't feel triumph. I don't feel anger. Strangely, I feel nothing at all. They are no longer a part of my life. They are just a chapter in a book I've already finished. These days, I'm busy with my book club, my little balcony garden, and planning a trip to Europe in the fall. I am 68 years old. I am not a confused old woman or a victim. I am a survivor, and more importantly, I am free. I found Nestor's old pocket watch, the one a fine craftsman repaired for me. It doesn't run anymore, but I keep it on my desk. It reminds me that its true value was never about whether it was a Rolex, but simply that it had endured, just like me.